Martha and James went camping up in Mount Charleston. This wasn't the first time they'd been camping up there. They usually go camping every other weekend. They drove up in the morning and got their camp set up by the afternoon. There was a light snowfall as they set up the tent. Then they went on a hike and gathered some wood to start a fire. They sat by the fire and talked, then cooked dinner. Then the snow started falling a little more heavily now, so they left the fire and decided to head into the tent. They got under the sleeping bag and began making out. Just then, Martha thought she heard someone walking in the snow. "Stop it, James. I hear something." "Hear what?" James asked. "Crunching in the snow. Don't you hear that?" "It's probably just an animal. Calm down, Martha. You're always so jumpy." "No, James, I'm not doing anything more until you go and see what that noise was." "Fine. I'll show you there's nothing to be scared of. Stay here. Stay undressed. I'll be right back." James put his clothes on, grabbed his hatchet, unzipped the tent, and went out. It was freezing. "Zip the tent up, James. It's too cold." "Yes, Martha. Whatever you say, dear." Martha could hear James walking around the camp. She then thought she heard him say, "I don't see anything out here. I'll be right back. I'm going to the bathroom," but wasn't quite sure because of the muffling of the tent and the wind picking up outside. Martha waited for James for what seemed like forever. She looked at her cell phone. It had to have been at least 20 minutes since he's been gone. It was a small blizzard out there. No way he'd be taking his sweet-ass time. Martha was getting very concerned at this point. Just as she was putting her clothes back on, she could hear footsteps in the snow approaching. "Oh, good, he's back." She laid back down and waited for him to open the tent. Nothing. "James, stop playing games. It's not funny anymore. Stop trying to scare me." 5 more minutes passed. She could hear rustling, but James still hadn't opened the tent. "Whatever, James. Keep playing your games. You're in the doghouse now, pal. No action tonight." Just then she heard a scratching on the top of the tent. "All right, James, that's enough. No more games." Martha unzipped the tent and rushed out. "All right, where are you? You son of a—" When she looked up, she saw James dangling from a tree branch. His throat had been cut open, and the scratching she heard on the roof of the tent was his wedding ring. Martha screamed and ran to the car. She drove to the nearest ranger station, and they called the police. Now, you might say this is based on the urban legend, but this case actually happened. The man who killed James and would have done the same to poor Martha if she hadn't escaped was a copycat killer. He killed multiple victims by recreating famous urban legends. A disembodied head floating in the woods, seen by hikers in multiple parts of North America. Witnesses have reported a few different physical appearances, though it is mostly seen as the head of a little girl or a baby. A few things are common among sightings. Number 1, the head silently floats along forest paths, several feet above the ground, at about an average human running speed. Number 2, the head does not speak or interact with anybody. The mouth is closed, the expression is blank, and the eyes are fixed forward in a stare. Number 3, the head cannot be followed. Some have tried, but the head inevitably is lost as it passes behind a tree or around a corner, apparently vanishing. Number 4, sightings are always followed by misfortune. How soon afterward varies, as does the scale. Events that follow can range from the loss of an important item, to the loss of a loved one, to the death of the witness. Much is unknown about this legend. Some speculate that the apparition is the spirit of a child visiting the location of her death. Nobody knows for sure whether the head causes subsequent tragedies or appears as a warning. There is some debate over if appearances in dreams are indicative of unfortunate events in waking. Have you heard of Barbed Wire Barbie? She's sort of an urban legend in my town. I've heard people in my neighborhood talk about her for a long while now. It starts like most ghost stories, with a murder. The way I've always heard it, a young woman was found in an alley. She was stripped, bloody, bruised, and her entire body was wrapped in barbed wire. A brutal, horrific way to die. She was never identified, so she was dubbed Barbed Wire Barbie, and the case went cold. The story might have ended there, except her body went missing from the morgue. And of course, this led to people claiming they'd seen her lurking the streets at night. A real creepy tale, but I guess I never really believed it. I'd been sitting out on the stoop, waiting for my mom to leave for her shift, so I could smoke the cigarette I'd lifted from her purse. "Dinner's in the fridge. Just heat it up. And don't stay out here long, it's getting dark," she huffed on her way down the steps. "I'm practically an adult. I can take care of myself," I replied, rolling my eyes. She sighed and said goodbye, finally leaving me to enjoy my nicotine fix. I walked across the road and out of sight, so none of my neighbors could rat on me. I sat against a wall, savoring those first few inhales. The immediate relief I felt gave way to primal fear, the instant something moved in my peripherals. Something was coming towards me. It was crawling, dragging itself ever closer. I couldn't bring myself to my feet. I sat in terrified anticipation as a silhouette entered the glow of a nearby streetlight. She was naked. Trails of dark blood seeped out of thousands of gangrenous wounds, made by the barbed wire she was entangled in. The smile stretching across her face caused fresh lacerations as a wire dug into her lips. I was so horrified by the sight of her that I hadn't even noticed the van pulling up. A man got out and leered at me. "She's right here," he called, and another man appeared from the other side. "Hey, girl, you want to take a ride with us?" he sneered as he got closer. I shook my head furiously. "Ah, that's too bad, 'cause it looks like you're all alone." "No, I'm not." He turned his head side to side, mocking me. "Huh, that's funny, because I don't see." He froze as she came into view. The scream he uttered was cut short by the strand of barbed wire that reached forward and tightened around his neck. It tore his throat open wide as another wrapped itself around the other man's eyes and mouth. I covered my ears to escape the sounds of tearing flesh, finally finding my feet. I ran for home through a spreading puddle of red, glancing back just before Barbie dragged them into the shadow. There was a farm, past tense, a farm born from the diligence and effort of one proud old man. It was a beautiful farm, spanning a little over 220 acres of pure green fields, rows upon rows of glistening wheat and barley, and anything else one could expect, all under the temperamental climate of 20th century northern England. But all things must come to an end. When the old man grew too frail, too fragile to continue his work, he passed on the duties to his son, the oldest of three. While his son may have had age and experience on his side, it seemed that the farm was not to prosper under him. The crops wilted and died, their pleas for survival falling on the deaf ears of the world around them. When the weather came down to batter the fields into submission, as it so often did, no attempt was made to protect them, and soon that beautiful white picket fence that surrounded the majority of the farmland began to crack and decay, the paint giving way to reveal the ugly mottled wood beneath. It was not long before, as they so often do, local children started to spread their rumors. "Don't go near the farm," they chorused to one another. "It's haunted. The old man in the window is a ghost of the owner. The owner is a killer," some would say. "I saw him carrying buckets filled with body parts to dump in the stream." No one paid attention to these rumors, obviously. They were that of childish fantasies, urban legends, all just a bit of fun. And who the hell was I to take that away from them? No, I would do well to just sit in my chair by that window and look out at the land that once meant so much to me, the land that I based my entire life off of, but had long since fallen to dilapidation. Why was this my fate, to spend the final years of my life trapped in a rotting house, piled to the brim with rubbish of all types that practically sealed me in this tomb? To live out each and every day, looking out at what had once been so glorious, while I sat, a hollow shell masquerading as a man, as everything I had once held dear crumbled. "You can trust me, Father. I won't let you down." 10 words that had sealed the fate of both myself and what had once been my proud legacy. We have this abandoned cemetery in our neighborhood. If you drove down our road, you would never notice it unless you knew where to look. It's a tucked-away, peaceful little plot surrounded by trees. The plot was sealed off by a wrought iron fence adorned with spikes to keep out delinquents. The tombstones gave off an unkempt vibe. Said tombstones seemed uncared for, but that's simply not the case. People who drive by said plot at night claim to see a hooded figure with a singular lantern with an eerie glow, a dying light to not disturb those resting in the graves, tending to the graves, keeping them tidy. This figure has been dubbed as a local urban legend with many names. Some call him the Lantern Man, some call him the ghost of the cemetery, but most people know him as the groundskeeper. Being the skeptic that I am, I didn't believe in such legends or lore, so I decided to do a little trespassing with nothing but my light and explore this seemingly abandoned cemetery. To no one's surprise, nothing happened. The seemingly abandoned graveyard was abandoned, or so I thought. That's until I moved my light over to the southernmost grave. That's when I saw it. There it stood, tearing away the moss from one of the headstones. It calmly turned to look at me with such eerie grace. I remember being frozen, almost entranced, by its eerie lantern. Foolishly enough, I decided to stay and take a photo. That's when it began slowly gliding over to greet me. That's whenever I decided to book it. To my negligence, I decided to be foolish and try and climb the fence. Its spikes dug into my hands. To my surprise, the figure stopped on the other side. It seemed uninterested in pursuing me further. It seemed like it only wanted me off its land, and it was not up for negotiation. It glared at me with disdain for invading its land. I hightailed it home. To this day, people claim to see the singular eerie lantern of the groundskeeper who guards the graveyard. One thing is for certain, it doesn't welcome visitors on its grounds. Every town has its urban legends, and mine was no different. While others had mysterious monsters or haunted houses, we had the story of Nathan Banyan. Nathan was a kid who lived with his dad in a house not too far from my own, near the outskirts of town. His dad was an alcoholic, and the two fought on a regular basis. Sometimes it would result in the dad storming out of the house, being gone for days on end. The story goes that one day, after his dad left, Nathan got so fed up he decided to run away from home. So he packed some supplies and took off for the woods. Whatever it was that had him so upset must have been bad, because it was a cold winter, and as he trailed around a local lake, he slid on a frozen patch of mud and fell through the water. He would have drowned right there had a nearby hunter not heard the commotion. He was taken to the hospital afterward and treated for pneumonia, while his fever cleared up fast. This was also where things got weird. When he returned to school, he told his friends that since he came home, he started to see things. He said that he'd look out his window at night to see a man standing at the edge of the woods, staring back at him. When his friends tried getting him to alert authorities, he'd refuse, saying that with all the tension going on between him and his dad, the strange man's presence was comforting. He even said he felt compelled to go out some nights and greet him. The guy obviously needed some kind of counseling, but he never got it. Even after the accident, his dad never stopped drinking. One night he left for a bender, only to return the next day to find his front door ajar and his son gone. A missing persons report was filed, but all that was found of the boy was a trail of footsteps that led to the lake. Upon searching, they came up with nothing. There's been plenty of speculation on what happened to him through the years, and a lot of people say it's paranormal, that the strange man led him back to the lake and whisked him away. Personally, I thought it was all a load of bull. Then yesterday, me and a few friends went to the same lake for a swim. I misjudged a dive and hit my head hard on a rock. One of the guys managed to pull me to shore, but I was close to drowning. I got back from the hospital tonight after some stitches. I was about to go lie down when I got that feeling of being watched. Pulling back my window curtains, I looked out to the woods, where I could see two figures staring back at me. I felt the urge to join them. Randy stared in confusion at the picture on his phone. It was an open doorway in one of the hallways of his apartment building, a stairwell beyond. Curious, he sent a message to Harry, the friend that had sent him the picture. "What's this?" "It's a stairwell in the North Hall," Harry sent as a reply seconds later. "Can you believe it? The urban legends are true. Randy's eyes widened. His apartment building only had 2 stairwells, in the east and west. He quickly dialed Harry, heart hammering. "Where are you?" Randy asked the second Harry picked up. "Where do you think?" Harry said. "No way I could pass up an opportunity to check this out." Randy felt his blood turn cold. "Haven't you heard the stories of what happens to people who go into places like that?" Randy whispered harshly, "You need to get out of there, now." "Relax, I just wanted to take a quick look," Harry replied aloofly. "I just went down a single level, and I'm just looking through the window into the next hall. Looks pretty much the same. Some of the doors are oddly spaced, though, and some of them look crooked." "Great, you saw. Now get out." "Okay, look, I'm going up the stairs right now." "What?" Randy didn't like the confusion in his friend's voice. "What's wrong?" "The door I came through, it's gone." "Oh, shit." Randy buried his face in his palm, dread swirling in his stomach. "I'm okay. I'm sure the way out is here somewhere. Maybe if I go up one more floor." As his friend kept talking, Randy looked around his own apartment. The ambient sounds of the building echoed through the thin walls. He could hear the faint sound of the Johnsons' new baby wailing. They lived on the same floor as Harry. "Your neighbor's kid is crying," Randy said. "Can you maybe follow the sound?" "No, I don't hear anything. It's really quiet here. Also, I've reached the next floor, but the door is on the wrong side, and the hallway outside is way too long. I don't think—" "Huh." Randy flinched at the shock in Harry's voice. "What?" I just heard a door open below me. There's footsteps coming." "Dude, get the fuck out of there," Randy said, a nervous sweat on his brow. "I'm trying. I keep going up, but I can't find the door I came through. This doesn't make any fucking sense. What's the—" Harry stopped. A startled yell came from the speaker of Randy's phone, cut off by the sound of a heavy thud. Then silence. Randy sat paralyzed on his couch. Phone was still up to his face. "Harry?" he asked in a shaky voice after almost a minute had passed. You there?" For several seconds more there was nothing. Then came a reply in a raspy, grinding voice, like rusty nails scraping a chalkboard. "Harry is dead." Streetlights traced a path along the distant horizon. Melanie hugged Brian from behind. "It's beautiful. Only when we're far away," he said. "Up close, not so much." She moved to his side and rested her head on his shoulder. "It's so sad we have to be a mile outside of town for you to enjoy the view. I'll appreciate it even more when I'm a few hundred miles away," he said. "So you're still planning on leaving for college?" "Of course. I have no reason to stay here." Brian immediately regretted what he said. Melanie turned and walked away. Steve finished his beer and tossed the bottle aside. "Let's go, lovebirds. We have a murder house to explore." He grabbed Stacy around the waist and led her inside the notorious Crawford farmhouse. The abandoned structure was the source of numerous urban legends. Melanie began to follow them. She stopped and placed her hand on Brian's shoulder. "Did you see that?" "What?" She squinted her eyes and shook her head. "I thought I saw someone peeking around the corner of the house." "That's nothing," he said. "The shadows are playing tricks on your eyes." Brian glanced up and saw a misshapen silhouette step back from one of the upstairs windows. He took Melanie's hand in his own and squeezed it gently. It's nothing more than shadows. They followed their friends inside. And here it is. Steve climbed halfway up the stairs, the very spot where Farmer Crawford shoved his wife to her death. Being an overachiever, he wasn't satisfied that her neck was broken. He used an axe to chop her into tiny little pieces. "Don't forget about their son," Stacy said. Crawford dragged him to the basement and crushed his skull with a brick. "Okay," Melanie said. I think I'm done with the tour." Brian nodded his head. "Same here." "Oh, come on," Steve frowned. "We haven't even made it to Grandma's room. That's where Crawford—" At that moment, he was lifted upward by an unseen force. His screams were cut short as his body slammed through the ceiling and disappeared. Stacy stepped forward. "Steve!" Without warning, she was pulled through the floorboards into the depths below. Brian turned and ran. Melanie attempted to follow suit, but the front door slammed shut and blocked her only route of escape. He could hear her struggle with the doorknob as he raced across the overgrown lawn. Her muffled voice cried, "Help!" Once, then silence. Brian fled toward the highway that led back to town. The sound of crickets filled the humid summer air. His body was drenched in sweat. From behind, he heard the front door thrown open and the sound of multiple footsteps headed in his direction. He was fast, but his pursuers were faster. The distant streetlights taunted him with a promise of safety. A split second before he stumbled, Brian felt a cold breath caress the nape of his neck. Every little town has its own quirks and unusual urban legends. Some towns had their haunted houses, others vanishing hitchhikers. My town, while a little more unique, isn't so interesting. If anything, it's more of an annoyance. Every evening, 6 p.m. on the dot, the sound of a train can be heard throughout the sleepy little town. It didn't matter where you lived or where you worked. As long as you were within the town's borders, you heard it. It wasn't so loud that you had to stop what you were doing, but it was loud enough to be heard. To be honest, most people simply assumed it really is a train. But the people who live here the longest know better. No train tracks for over 100 miles of this little town. Not even a set of abandoned tracks can be found. And yet, every evening, 6 p.m., you can hear it. People have gotten used to it. No one really cares. After all, it's just a noise. Then we started to hear it in the mornings, too. Every morning, at 8 a.m. To some, this is an unusual blessing. It was a perfect alarm to remind people to wake up or to get to work on time. And then we started hearing it in the afternoons. And after that, midnight. People started to ask questions. People started to complain. They started to write letters to their politicians, demanding at the very least an explanation. None could be given. There are no trains near where we live. But now we hear them every 5 minutes. Exactly every 5 minutes.